Hello, my name is Sonali and I welcome you all to this week's Sunday special episode of Around the World in 7 Days. Recently, the G20 summit was held under the chairmanship of India. India got many achievements in this meeting. One of these achievements was that India succeeded in getting membership of the G20 group for the African Union. The African Union had been trying to join the G20 for the years, and this time it finally succeeded. In fact, experts believe that since the African Union is a broad grouping of 55 countries, therefore it should get a place in the G20 group for better representation in the global economy. On the other hand, it was also being said that the G20 group needs the African Union. Also, it is being seen as India's success. It is believed that India has now got the lead in the race between India and China for the leadership of the global south. This lead gained by India in Africa is being seen as a challenge for China. In such a situation, the question is what benefit India will get if the African Union joins the G20. The second question is, how is India moving on the path of becoming the leader of the global south? And the third question is, what kind of challenge India has posed to China? So let us try to understand. Since South Africa is already a member of G20, therefore 96% of the rest of Africa's population and 85% of its GDP were away from this important platform. The African continent is home to 1.4 billion people, and this population is almost equal to that of China or India. If seen from the perspective of economy, African countries will be the 8th largest economy in the world. In such a situation, keeping such a large part of the world economy out till now was not appropriate for the effectiveness of G20. Now that the African Union has joined the G20, the group will represent 55 additional members, a large portion of low-income countries, and the views of nearly 80% of the world's population. Africa, on the other hand, is a comparatively poor continent. A large population of this continent is backward. This is a sensitive area that needs cooperation and development. Due to only South Africa being in an economic group like G20, most of the African countries were not able to benefit economically. With the African Union becoming its member, it is more likely that a large part of Africa will be economically strengthened. The same thing applies to other G20 countries also. By getting a place for the African Union in this group, other countries will be able to gain more benefits from Africa. Africa is a treasure trove of natural resources and energy, and the countries of the world need it. African countries are rich in natural resources such as gold, chromium, platinum, cobalt, diamonds, and uranium. But African Union's joining G20 is not only beneficial for the countries there, India will also get rewards for this effort. In fact, for India, Africa's development is fundamental to its foreign policy objectives. India has always been a vocal supporter of Africa's inclusion in multilateral organizations. India's relations with Africa have been very consistent and regular in recent years. The growing role of Africa in Indian foreign and economic policy is clearly visible in our growing diplomatic efforts, which currently cover 43 African countries. It is also important that India imports about 18% of its crude oil from Africa, especially from countries like Nigeria, Angola, South Sudan. The African continent is also the source of 20% of India's coal. India imports about 90% of cashew nuts and the same amount of phosphate from Africa. India's entire fertilizer industry is based on what it buys from countries like Morocco, Tunisia, and Senegal. India's effort is to connect with Africa and become an ally in its development. The African continent is one of the fastest growing regions in the world, full of economic, cultural, and linguistic diversity. The special thing is that Africa has always wanted to increase cooperation with India. This region of the world has also been historically associated with India. In such a situation, when India has been successful in getting Africa a place in the G20 group, then from India's point of view, a big investment market will be created. And the hope is that India will be able to give a befitting reply to the Chinese challenges in Africa. On the other hand, with the African Union joining G20 after India's efforts, India is being called the leader of the Global South. First, let us understand the Global South. Broadly speaking, China, India, Brazil, and Africa are called the Global South. This is not a strictly geographical division, as Australia and New Zealand are also in the Southern Hemisphere. But these countries are not part of the Global South. The Global South includes countries, particularly those in Southern Hemisphere, that are often referred to as developing, least developed, or underdeveloped. These are mainly located in Africa, Asia, and Latin America. These countries generally have high levels of poverty, income inequality, challenging living conditions compared to wealthier countries in the Global North. The Global North consists of more prosperous nations located mostly in North America and Europe, including some new countries in Oceania and elsewhere. There is a race going on between China and India to become the leader of the Global South. But India and China want to take credit for the effort to include the African Union in the G20. India's foreign policy has been inclusive. At the same time, there has been a feeling of big and small in China's foreign policy. Organizations like Organization of Non-Aligned Countries and SAARC are proof of this policy of India. But China stayed away from such organizations. But now China feels that it can become the leader of the Global South. Then India has emerged as its biggest rival. This is the reason why China is using all the ways to achieve this leadership, and by any hook or crook. But India seems to be getting an edge in this. One reason for this is that Japan is advocating India to become the leader of the Global South as opposed to China. According to Japan, India can prove to be better than China in connecting Western countries with the countries of the Global South. The main reason for this is that the relations between Western countries and China are strained. The second reason is that India is a democratic country and Japan wants to increase its reach in Africa with such a country. In such a situation, India has presented a challenge to China in this area. At present, Africa needs infrastructure development worth $100 billion annually, which China alone cannot fulfill. This is the reason why countries like America, European countries, Saudi Arabia, Indonesia, Korea are also working there. In such a situation, India has a good opportunity to invest in African countries and reduce Chinese dominance there. Now it is the turn of this program's Sunday special segment, in which we will delve into other significant international news. In view of the serious human rights situation in Egypt, America has started imposing economic sanctions on it. Egypt has not been able to maintain US conditions on the release of political prisoners and other human rights issues. America alleges that Egypt has imprisoned more political prisoners than it has released since 2022. Because of this, the United States plans to stop $85 million in military aid to Egypt. Democrat Senator Chris Murphy has also urged US President Joe Biden's administration to freeze more than $235 million in military aid over Egypt's serious human rights record. According to a US State Department letter to the committees that outlined foreign military financing, of the $85 million withheld from Egypt, $55 million will be redirected to Taiwan, and the remaining $30 million will be sent to Lebanon. Taiwan has expressed concerns over the exercises being conducted by China. According to Taiwan, Chinese aircraft carriers and jets are conducting exercises in the Pacific Ocean. At the same time, in this matter, analysts say that this exercise taking place in the Western Pacific region is China's biggest exercise involving an aircraft carrier so far. China has included its Shandong aircraft carrier and dozens of warplanes in this exercise. According to Taiwan's defense ministry, they tracked about 35 Chinese warplanes, including J-10 fighters, around the island on the morning of September 14. About 28 of these aircraft flew over the southwestern corner of the island's Air Defense Identification Zone, or ADIZ, while the other aircraft passed through the Bashi Channel. The Bashi Channel separates Taiwan from the Philippines. Actually, China considers Taiwan as its part. A few days ago, the United States, together with Canada, sent warships through the Taiwan Strait. It is believed that China has started this exercise in response to this. French President Emmanuel Macron was on a 2-day visit to Bangladesh. During this, he signed an agreement with Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina. This agreement pertains to providing loans to Bangladesh for infrastructure building and assistance in satellite technology. According to Bangladesh Satellite Company Limited, whatever satellite it will purchase under this agreement will travel in an orbit of about 350 miles above the Earth. It will be used mainly to observe crops and ocean conditions. It is noteworthy that France is the 5th largest trading partner of Bangladesh in the engineering, energy, aerospace and water sectors. So that's all in today's episode. See you in the next episode. But before that, let's note down a question based on today's story. India has become the leader of the Global South by leading the way of the African Union's entry in the G20 group. Evaluate.